Hey, this is Sho, and thank you so much for checking out the video. We're going to be looking at Monark once again today, talking about 5 good tips for late game battles. Now, Monark has a really interesting battle system. I do enjoy it a lot. Really, really do. With that said, though, some of the late game battles do get really challenging, and there are certain strategies that I found that work extremely well, especially if we're talking about post-game content where you'll need to make your way to the true ending. So, with that said, let's take a look at 5 pro tips that I can give you right now. Starting with number 1, we're going to be talking about something that's quite obvious, and that is using resonance. Now, resonance is, of course, the main character's unique authority skill, which allows him to, I guess you could say, link himself to basically any unit on the field. When the main character does this, they can obviously share any buffs or debuffs, status effects that are paired with that character, and depending on how you upgrade the main character skill tree, you can get additional benefits by using these, such as extra increase of stats or reduced damage as you're all connected, which is really, really valuable in the late game, believe me, to mitigate damage. Additionally, which is something that not a lot of people discuss with resonance, is it is possible to resonance enemies. Specifically, this will be critical in some of your late game boss battles when some of the bosses have access to awakening skills. So these are obviously hard-hitting techniques that do well in one-shotting perhaps anyone on the field. So one good strategy that you can use is use your resonance with an enemy who's been awakened. Then you can be able to get that awakening status as, again, you share any statuses, including awakening, and then you'll be actually able to use their own buff against them by launching your critical buff or your critical attack back at them. That basically stonewalls the enemy from doing massive damage to you and allows you to do massive damage back to them. So use resonance, it's extremely important, especially when we talk about the second part, which is buffs. Buffs are the key in this game. Now, if you checked out my 2 to 3 turn leveling guide, how to clear levels in 2 to 3 turns, you'll see that I use quite a lot of buffing in order to make sure that I can get through the level quickly. Honestly, early game, you don't have to worry about it. Mid game, you're going to start thinking about it. Late game, and especially post game, you will be needing to do this. The buffs are extremely powerful in Monarch. They really are. It's the same level as using like Shin Megami Tensei buffs from Nocturne. As a key example, Lust, which is the primary side damage, the magic damage legion, Fireball at level 99 max stats with some pretty good equipment deals roughly about 750 damage. One use of the side boosting, which increases 2 stages, basically doubles that. Deals roughly around 1200 damage. If you get the full 5 stack of buffs of Psy, you can deal upwards to 2600 damage, which basically knocks out any non-boss enemy in one hit. If you're able to then boost your critical chances and critical hits, you can be doing close to 6, 7, maybe even 8,000 points of damage, which is honestly only comparable with the abilities that do damage based upon madness percentage. Now, of course, that's very dangerous because you need to have a high mad for it to work. So the Psy skills offer a very, very nice alternative, which brings me to number 3. The Psy skills are absolutely broken. Lust itself is single-handedly the most important legion in the game. It has carried me through the entire post-game, it carried me through the final true boss, and it is the main crux of all leveling in the game and all clearing in the game. It has the highest Psy stats, its abilities are fairly low costing, and you can knock people out in 1 to 2 hits with almost relative ease. Focus on using Psy attacks. Your physical attacks are good, but you'll never deal as much damage with a single fireball to the face than you would with 1,000 blades or 1,000 gunshots going back. So focus on using Psy when you go through the later half of the game. You'll just find yourself clearing the stages much quicker. 4. Now, this might seem a little counterproductive to the whole claim of quickness, but play defensively. Some strategy games really benefit from moving quick, right? You jump in, you rush the enemy, you knock out the bases or you knock out the units, and then 1, 2, 3 clear. Monarch doesn't really do that. Monarch is a game where patience and time play a bigger role in the success of your campaign. I highly, highly, highly recommend utilizing buffs in your first few turns, getting the resonance set up with your party, getting all those extra benefits, and then moving one by one, single-handedly knocking out each enemy as you progress through the map. The worst thing you can do is jump in, as enemies will swarm you, and if your main character happens to take that KO, it's game over. So I would recommend playing defensively, especially in the late game, as you'll be not only mitigating high damage output enemies, but there's a lot of traps you need to navigate as well. So this is one of those games, very similar, I guess you could say, to Dark Souls, where slow and steady really wins the race. Which takes me to my last point, number 5. Now, Awakening is really, really, really good. The whole madness gauge is a very interesting concept, and I can see a lot of people thinking that Enlightenment is the way to go. The problem with Enlightenment is that it takes too long to set up. You need to have a human character go in their Awakening mode. You have to set the main character up just enough where the next resonance will trigger his madness and get the Awakening buff. It's honestly a hassle to set up. And if you're trying to mitigate some of the higher damage bosses fights that you'll have to do, you're going to find yourself in a really difficult position. But Awakening can be triggered incredibly easily. In fact, if you're able to get the buff that increases the percentage that Resolve gives per turn, you can actually get an Awakening done in a single turn by having the main character and then 2 other members use Defer on them. I highly suggest for the later levels to keep one human character with you, preferably one that has either good defensive bonuses, such as Nozomi, or who has really good extra buff skills, such as Kokoro, to just sit in the back and keep using Resolve over and over and over again, so the entire party can take advantage of the Awakening buff. Remember, like Madness and Enlightenment, Awakening does offer a massive buff to all your stats, and it is a good way to mitigate damage and deal more damage, especially if you're looking at AoE attacks on some of your enemies. So with that said, do try to keep one key member behind, and as you're moving through that kind of defensive position, you can have your backup Legion units supporting the main character by applying those buffs. So there we go. That's 5 key combat techniques I highly recommend to be using in the late game. Once more, just to go through it. Number 1, resonance is key. Always have it set up for your characters. 2, always be buffing, especially Psi buffing, because number 3, Psi skills are absolutely broken, and it's the best way to clear enemies quickly without having to worry about getting swarmed. 4, in order to mitigate that, move slowly. Think defensively. Don't go too far ahead, because you might run into a trap and trigger some extra spawns. And then finally, as you're moving up through the map step by step, have one human character in the back. Basically keep taking advantage of the Awakening mechanic to make sure that your party is doing max damage and is max protected as much as possible. Plus, it's a great way to mitigate the madness gauge, because as you use your Defer more and more, you'll be increasing your madness more and more per use. So, with that said, that is 5 pro tips I can recommend for the late game battle mechanics in Monarch. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'm always happy to answer anything. And if this guide was super helpful, yeah, please leave a like. And if you haven't already, you can send your love by subscribing to the channel. Again, every little bit helps, and it's my way of feeling your love. So thank you for sending it. Anyway, this is Show, and I will catch you next time. Cheers!